today about the therapeutic approach for men in mental health and faith-based systems. So we'd like to go to the next slide, and I want to kind of talk to you about what we will be looking at. Our presentation goes. We're going to be looking at the historical context about why mental health and faith matters. We hope to engage you with the blueprint for faith organizations to map out its community needs as it is related to mental health services. And number 3, we're going to talk about the steps that we sit down, a group of us and the pastors and the mental health professionals sit down and we establish some steps and programmings to see how safe spaces for spiritual and mental health healing will look like. And then again, we need data. And we will be talking about that data, and Bree will come to bring us that data. Now, how this is going to work is Dr. Adams is going to present for about 15 minutes. That first piece, historical content about mental health, why mental health is important in relationship to faith. Then I will come and present the blueprint and the steps, and then we will close with Bree, and she will close out with 15 minutes, and then we'll have a question and answer period. Now, we have Jacqueline, our executive assistant there. If we cannot answer those questions, we will take them down, and we will send you an email and get back to you, okay? So can I see the next slide before Dr. Adams come? Just briefly before Dr. Adams come, there is a video that I would like to share with you all that we had created. It's basically a brief summary of the work that we've done over the last 26 months for you to get an idea how impactful this work has been. And so before Dr. Adams comes, we're going to let you listen to that video.
Unfortunately, many men have not been able to confront their traumas, leading to ongoing pain and suffering that can be passed down through generations. It is important to understand that this cycle of hurt can be broken. Taking steps to heal is crucial to prevent further harm. Recognizing and overcoming trauma can be a challenging and complex journey for anyone, including men who may have experienced trauma in their childhood. It is understandable that these experiences can be challenging to process and can have a significant impact on one's life if left unaddressed. As men, we may experience challenges with anger, isolation, and avoidance for some time before seeking help. It's worth recognizing that trauma can impact men in distinctive ways, but it is important to know that seeking support can still have a positive impact on the healing process. What began as a men's breakfast fellowship has now transformed into a movement that radically will change the hearts of men in the city of Indianapolis. The Men and Mental Health Movement, Indy, is a vision given to Dr. Preston T. Adams III, Senior Pastor of Amazing Grace Christian Church. Dr. Dwight Holland of Family and Community Partners serve as co-convener and lead therapist. The vision is for the church to provide a safe space for men to gather where they can enjoy a meal, engage in fellowship, and receive free group-based therapeutic solution and pastoral counseling from trained psychotherapists, family therapists, licensed clinical therapists, and certified mental first aid instructors, as well as evidence-based practices and assessment tools incorporated into the healing process during each free session. Come out and get connected to the Men and Mental Health Movement, Indy. Free sessions take place every month at local congregations in the city of Indianapolis from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. A complimentary wholesome breakfast is always provided. To register for the next free session, scan the QR code at the bottom right of the screen. Men, we can come together in a therapeutic setting led by the church and mental health counseling organizations for healing and new hope. Remember, help and support are available to those who need it.
morning, everyone. Good morning. I hope that video gave you a good synopsis overview of the work that Dr. Holland, myself, and the team have been doing since January of 2023. I always like to say as well, when we talk about the movement, that the movement started out organically, started out without funding, started out with a vision that God gave. It started out with a collaboration and a partnership with my brother, who we have worked together for a number of years, have known each other for a couple of decades. And it's just beautiful to see it manifest in the way that it has. And for us to be here today, presenting to you is really not only a joy, but it is an honor. So it's something that we have prepared diligently for to make sure we give you our best today. So thank you all for being here and for taking time out of your day to come and hear our presentation. I want to start by talking about the historical context. That's important, right? Because so often what happens is the church and mental health don't intersect, but the church and mental health should intersect. Would you agree with that? Yes. And I'll say it this way, just to be inclusive: the church and faith traditions should intersect, because everyone may not be a part of the church, may not be Christian, and so we want to respect other faiths. We even want to respect those who may not necessarily claim a faith, but see themselves as spiritual, right? Because as we go through this, what you will see is that the people that we are serving on a daily basis, and in particular, our focus starting out was men, and in particular, men of color, because we know that there's a high degree of men and a higher degree of men of color who either do not seek therapeutic services or do not know that these services are available to them. So it just seemed natural when we had that breakfast back in January of last year. And Dr. Holland and I got together and talked about, you know what, this could go beyond just us getting together, eating some bacon and eggs. We could actually do something with this. We had about 50 men to show up and say, we need help. We want to deal with depression. We want to deal with anxiety. We want to deal with suicidal ideations. We want to deal with these things, but we don't know where to go or how to deal with it, or we may not have the resources. And so that was the birth of it. So the impact of faith, the relationship between faith and mental health, has been a crucial aspect of spiritual life throughout history. Mind and spirit. Spiritual texts often address the emotional and psychological turmoil of individuals who are seeking reprieve. Then there are biblical narratives. Many major figures face challenges that could be categorized as mental health struggles today. And if you have a sense for scripture, or even if you just have a sense for Bible stories, and we're going to highlight one of the main characters in the Bible, David, today, you will see, if you haven't ever thought about it like this, that David dealt with a lot of things that are mental health issues. So the Bible in and of itself has practical application, and it's saying to us that the mental health community and the faith community working together can make a difference in our cities. Then there's resilience and healing. Faith has consistently provided individuals with hope, resilience, and a sense of belonging. Truth be told, we're here today because we have faith that we can make things better. Would you agree with that? Yes. We have faith that we can make a difference in our respective corners of the world. It hasn't happened yet, or maybe it doesn't happen as often as we'd like it to happen, but we have faith, the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. We haven't yet seen it yet, but we know that if we keep working with Johnny and his family, they will get better. We can make a difference. Let's go to the next slide. So ancient views, just to highlight, ancient civilizations, we chose the Egyptians, Greeks, and Romans, integrated spirituality into their understanding of health and well-being. Temples and religious rituals served as a place of healing. So in Egypt, we saw and see a focus on the afterlife, which included rituals and practices that connected to spirituality. In the Greek culture, we saw philosophers and physicians like Hippocrates that saw a link between mental and physical health. In Roman culture, the Roman Empire emphasized civic duty and public health, which included religious practices. Let's go to the next slide. Now, in modern views, during the Middle Ages, religious institutions were central to community life as many provided care for the sick, including those with mental health issues. In the Renaissance period, we saw a rise in science and more secular approach to health. Nevertheless, faith continued to play a role, as many asylums were run by religious organizations. In the Enlightenment period, thought leaders throughout Europe questioned traditional authority and embraced the notion that humanity could be improved through rational change. Let's go to the next slide. In the modern era, in the 20th century, we saw a shift in the perception of faith and mental health, seeing them as separate due to the intolerance for religious authority in the past. So we begin to see here a division, a divergence, away from working together, right? In the contemporary views, today there is a growing recognition of the importance of spiritual well-being in mental health care. Let's go to the next slide. Now, we're going to talk about David for a moment. And again, whether you aspire to the biblical text or not, I think you'll get something out of this, okay? So David wrestled with anxiety. He wrestled with loneliness. He wrestled with fear and grief, especially during times of persecution and betrayal. Okay, just think about David not as this mystical biblical character, but think about David as us. How do we deal with anxiety? How do we deal with our feelings of loneliness? How do we deal with persecution and grief and betrayal? So his Psalms, like Psalm 13, reveal his cries to God for comfort and solace. Despite these challenges, David ultimately found hope and refuge where? In his faith. Ultimately, what David believed is that God would rescue him. And again, whether you aspire to this as a traditional belief or not, and the majority of the room raised their hands when you say, who are people of faith? There is that ultimate belief that is outside of us that says things can get better. I'm going through something right now, but things can get better. How many of us have heard pastors like me say, just hold on to your hope? That's what we mean by that. I mean, it sounds good and all of that, and we want y'all to shout, preach, but really what we try to say is hold on. It's going to get better, right? David, known as a man after God's own heart, the only person in Scripture that has that designation. And we know David wasn't no saint, right? Anybody know the biblical character David? Give me a show of hands. Okay, just a little bit about it. Yeah, he was a shepherd and all that stuff. David had some issues. Yeah, we don't often preach about his issues, but he had some issues, right? But he was known as a man after God's own heart. Why? I believe because David kept his faults before God. He constantly said, God, I am broken. God, I am hurting. God, I don't know what to do. God, they chasing me. They're trying to kill me. Saul's after me. What did I do to him? You know, you ever had a boss after you that you didn't do anything against? Come on, y'all, talk back to me now. This is where my preacher hat went on. Y'all talk back to me, okay? But he was a powerful example of somebody who struggled with mental health. I bet a number of you never thought about it that way. You see where the intersection of mental health and faith work? Because we preach David all the time. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. How many of us can recite the 23rd Psalm? That was written by David, a depressed man. And that's what he was talking about. In the midst of my depression, I got to remind myself that the Lord is my shepherd. I want for nothing. Okay? So he often wrote of his distress and mental anguish in the Psalms, expressing his emotions through poetry. Let's go to the next slide. Jesus. As we would say, anybody know the man? Jesus' teachings offer profound wisdom and healing for soul and focus on connection. His words and actions align with modern therapeutic principles, promoting emotional and mental well-being. Jesus' teachings are filled with themes that align with modern therapeutic principles. When Dr. Holland comes up and talks about the blueprint, it's going to connect all of this in a way that's going to make you say, if you haven't already, this is actually pretty cool stuff. Wow, never thought of it like that. So let's go to the next slide. See, Jesus taught, for example, rest and self-care. Matthew 11:28-30. He says, "Come to me all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." He understood the importance of rest when we are weary. And how many times do we tell ourselves, I need to rest? And how many of us actually practice rest? You can, yeah, I know it's hard, right? Listen, I'm amongst the guiltiest of them, right? But we recognize that we burn out if we don't rest. And how many of us tell our clients, you need some self-care? Girl, you need to go get your feet and your nails done and forget about them kids for a day. Come on, y'all, talk back to me now. I'm preaching better than y'all saying amen. Talk back to me. Okay, so Jesus taught this. This is biblical narrative. Do you see where the connection between faith and mental health works? So we're preaching this every Sunday. We're teaching this every Wednesday. But we don't often know because we're not therapists. Most pastors are not. We're not mental health clinicians. Most pastors are not. We need the Dr. Hollands and others. We need you to say, okay, church, here's how you connect this to people who don't understand biblical narrative. So rest and self-care. Go to the next slide. Community and support. So in his teachings, Jesus talked about love and compassion. Okay? He instructed his followers to love one another as he had loved them. He talks about emotional well-being. The principle of community care and mental health aligns with this teaching, as supportive relationships are vital for emotional well-being. We say to each other all the time, please do not try to go at this alone. No man, no woman is an island. We can't do this by ourselves. But how many of us, if we were being honest, I ain't gonna ask you to raise your hand, will bend over backwards trying not to ask for help? Come on, talk back to me, somebody. Yeah, I'm guilty too. Like I know I need help, but I'm just not gonna ask. But that goes against good mental health support. Go to the next, not the next slide yet. Community resources, we must work together. This is what we're doing. We must work together to create environments of acceptance, offer support through churches, organizations, and other community resources. Now, what we don't do in these sessions, and Dr. Holland's gonna highlight this, is we don't preach to the men that come. It's not a Bible study. Hello, somebody. It's not an opportunity for pastors like me to get up, pastors like Dr. Holland to get up and say, this is what the Lord said today. That's not why we're there. No, we're there so that the therapist can say, here's how you practically deal with depression. Here's how you deal with anxiety. Here's how you deal with suicidal ideations. Okay, and again, you're gonna hear a lot of that in the blueprint. Go to the next slide. Forgiveness and healing. Wow. I'm gonna let that one sit for a minute. Because right now, somebody just got tense and said, I ain't about to forgive them or nothing. Come on, y'all, talk back to me. Y'all mad at me for even bringing up forgiveness. Remember, I'm a pastor, I preach, I look at crowds every week. I know what them look like. Got quiet on me, see? Forgiveness and healing, right? One of the most powerful therapeutic things we can do is forgive. Because here we are walking around mad at folks that could care less about us. My wife and I had this discussion just this morning. She's laughing because her and her friend were talking about their siblings and all this stuff. And I was listening to them, and I got out of the car and I told them, Miss Lisa, I said, listen, y'all need to leave Jimmy This and I start naming all. I said, y'all need to leave all them people alone because they don't care that y'all are mad at them right now. Come on, talk back to me, y'all. Y'all spending time in it. So forgiveness is a core theme in Jesus' teaching. Jesus demonstrated forgiveness even on the cross. In therapy, okay, forgiveness is often a process that leads to personal healing as it allows individuals to let go of past hurts and move forward. So how often do we realize that we got to let go of those hurts? I know, son, your daddy abandoned you. I know your mama was a drug addict. I know that your grandmother and grandfather abused you. I know, and I know it's painful, right? I know because I've been there. But let me tell you how I healed. I had to learn to forgive, not to forget, not to allow it to repeat, but not to let it hold me down. Go to the next slide. I think I'm almost there. Jesus' scalable solutions, positive messages. His message of peace, love, forgiveness, and care for the marginalized people made wellness accessible to all. Rest and compassion. Meditation. Jesus withdrew often to pray. And I think, as a practical theologian, that Jesus said, this ain't in the Bible, but I think Jesus said, you know what? I need a break from these people. Yeah, catch me later. I'm headed to the mountains. How many of us have done that? Like you ever get to a point in your life where you just say, you know what, I need a break from everybody. Where you going? Don't worry about it. I'll be back. If you don't see me on the news, you know I'm okay. And then, of course, prayer, right? Let's go to the next slide. So his teachings align with modern therapeutic principles. It offers scalable solutions. He calls us to rest, trust, and community still holds profound relevance for mental health today. His teachings provide comfort and guidance for seeking both spiritual and emotional well-being. Next slide. Hope and redemption, healing and wholeness. These are universal principles, friends. These are not necessarily biblical principles, although we teach them as such, but these are universal principles. Why are we here today? To learn how to sharpen the saw to give some folks that we're going to go back out in the world to some hope and some healing, to help them with redemption, right? Let's go to the next slide. And this is where I pass the mic to Dr. Holland for the blueprint. All right.
You are a stigma breaker. And we're here together to promote collaboration, public education, support, and advocacy. You can have a seat. But again, I'm Dwight Holland, and thank you, Dr. Adams, for that presentation. I'm just so fascinated with what's going on. My training is from Christian Theological Seminary, is in psychotherapy and faith. And what I was trained to do is to build bridges between systems, specifically within the church, being an ordained minister for about 40 years, pastored churches over the last 30 years, and then I had a mental health crisis within the church, and I left, and can anybody relate? And then I decided to go into this business full time. But again, my training is to develop systems and infrastructures and bridges to integrate faith and mental health, to develop a container to hold individuals in their developmental process. Are y'all hearing me? Yeah. So the whole idea between collaborating with Dr. Preston was a godsend, because this is something that I had planned to do back in the 80s. And when I was talking about mental health in the 80s, my community of faith, they kind of shunned because it was not part of our culture. Am I talking to anybody? Yeah. And so I believe when you're called to do something, whether it's a God call or a universal call or whatever, there's a gravitating pull that takes place. And so I'm just amazed about how the gravitating pull has brought all of you to this place. So what had happened, or what's going on, and we're going to kind of walk you through this process and try to drill a little deeper here, was I became exhausted with churches just kind of preaching about the gospel, but not really having any impact on the community. I'm talking about specifically within church systems. What was going on was individuals was coming to church on Sunday and shout and pray, but could not deal with their hurt on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And so how can we develop a system or an infrastructure to hold these individuals on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday? And so the ideal of collaborating with Dr. Preston was a fantastic opportunity. And so the ideal was to build on our faith tradition, not take away from the faith tradition, but to build on it. And so what we decided to do, got with a group of the pastors. There was about 8 to 10 of them and about 10 or 15 therapists, and some of them came aboard, and I'll talk a little more about that. But building on the faith tradition and mapping community needs. And this is where it becomes exciting and interesting. We talked about bridging the gap, the power of collaboration. In the book of Acts, Jesus said, having favor with the community and all the people, having relationships with NAMI, having, how many of you are here therapists? Oh, wow, I better be very careful. Soon to be. How many of you here are pastors or ministers or laypersons or first ladies or second ladies or whatever the case may be? Are just members. But the ideal was to bridge the gap, and how we did it was the interfacing between psychotherapy and faith to develop a container which I talked about. And then we had this focus group where we all got together and we began to have this conversation. This is what we need to be focusing on. And then we looked at what we call the social determinants of health based upon the CDC. And there's 5 social determinants of health that they recommend or they suggest that all of us we are chasing for or we're trying to acquire. And if we don't achieve these social determinants, there's an adverse effect that affect us from a mental standpoint, whether it's depression, anxiety, or whatever that looks like. And then partnering with clinicians. I was amazed when I called some of my colleagues, and all of them responded and said, yes, I would like to be a part of this. Next slide. And so we had this powwow. That is a group of the pastors and the mental health professionals that took place. There was a conversation with the local pastors and the therapists, and we were talking about how can we create an infrastructure to make an impact on a group of men in certain zip codes in the community. If you live in the city of Indianapolis, there is a lot of violence that's going on in the city. And so how can we collaborate to help reduce or to help 1 or 2 men or to give them the soft skills to go back and maybe bring it to or take it to their community, their family system to teach self-regulations. You kind of follow what I'm saying? And so that's what this conversation was about. Is that where the video is? And so we're going to ask you to look at this video, and you're going to see the process of the focus group and some of the things that we talked about, and then I'll go to the next slide after that.
It's a good resource for us, and it helps the men actually open up and be able to communicate what's going on in their lives.
We always think that we're going through something or go through challenges that only us ourselves are facing, but it's good to have fellowship and know that as a community, we all go through a lot of similar things, and with that, we're able to support each other and uplift each other and help really heal ourselves through that.
It makes it easier when you're surrounded by a group of people that share your experiences. So if you're anxious about coming or you're scared about coming, just know that out of the whole room, whether it's 50 people or 10 people, somebody there is going to share that same experience that you might have had in your life.
We have a lot of families right now that have been traumatized, that's going through grief. And so how can the church respond to that. Not the saying that churches within our community is not doing this work, but then how can we work collaboratively together and create these containers to help reduce, number one, the stigma, but then more importantly, the mental health symptoms that they're dealing with, okay?
So my question to the clergy here is there a biblical way to approach mental health? Because that would take the stigma off of, when most people think of mental health, they're thinking of those diagnosable issues, which is an automatic stigma.
The idea behind men and mental health is really simple. It is men are foundationally the core of family, the core of our communities, the core of our society. And so if men are solid and strong and whole, or as whole as we can be, that has a direct correlation on the health of a family.
Are we talking about depression?
Right.
Are we talking about grief?
Right.
Are we talking about post-traumatic stress disorder? Like, are we talking about the impact of trauma in our families and neighborhoods, and just making that common language monthly from the pulpit?
Because one of the challenges that we have in our congregation is that we don't help people deal with the trauma that they've experienced before they came to Christ. You see? And so when they come to Christ, they believe the trauma is erased.
Right. Come on. Automatically.
Come on.
But the trauma is not erased. The trauma is just brought to the surface.
Yeah. We're destroying all of those myths in this practical way. Meeting monthly in a therapeutic circle. The genius behind it is that it is not the pastors that are providing the therapy.
Right.
It is trained, licensed, educated therapists.
Right.
Because here's the thing, we can't pray everything away.
No.
Jesus come back, the preachers will be talking, the therapists will be listening, you know.
As long as I got King Jesus, I don't need nobody else. No, you need Jesus and a therapist.
Yeah.
We're all going through something. So I think every man should be here. Look at the calendar, get the dates, show up.
To register for the next free session, scan the QR code at the bottom right of the screen. Men, we can come together in a therapeutic setting led by the church and mental health counseling organizations for healing and new hope. Remember, help and support are available to those who need it.
Okay, and so that was the conversation, and we have many conversations like that, just trying to tweak this program. And so, like I said, in terms of the blueprint, we looked at the social determinants of health, and we talked about how when these needs are not met, individuals deal with mental health symptoms. Whether it's the ideal of suicidal ideation, loneliness, or just kind of giving up. And so what we looked at specifically, what area in terms of the social determinants we would like to focus on, it was the healthcare, accessibility to healthcare in the framework of mental health. Okay, and then we began to look at specific zip codes in the city of Indianapolis. Bree will be talking about the zip codes that we target specifically. Could you go to the next slide? But there's one piece that I would like to look at here, and it's according to some of the findings that we found. And I asked the question, why do men of color don't take advantage of mental health or therapy? And right there it talks about some of the barriers that we're faced with. And several barriers contribute to the stigma, the lack of cultural competency, and of course, socioeconomic. And then black men often face significant challenges such as economic disparities, healthcare access, and then the systemic racism. And we begin to kind of just really talk about how these variables affect individuals in certain zip codes. Let's go to the next slide. These are our partners. There's some of them that partnered with us, and that's how we're able to make it happen. We try to be very diverse in our efforts, anywhere from psychologists, psychotherapists, licensed social workers, licensed therapists, and then, of course, the pastors that are involved. And under Dr. Adams' leadership. And let's give Dr. Adams a hand just for kind of being forward. Let's go to the next slide. So the ideal for one of the things that one of the findings from the conversation, we began to understand that men of color needed a safe space. There are certain studies about being able to trust individuals in safe spaces, for it affects the neurological system when you're able to trust, and it reduces the anxiety. And so we were keen on making sure that these men felt safe to come to the space, and reassuring them that what goes on in this space will stay in this space. And there were forms of confidentiality that was signed. Let's go to the next slide. So this is where it gets real good. Where did we, base this model on? And if some of you are I've seen a lot of hands of therapists, and I know if you went through this process of graduate school, especially in group dynamics, there was a guy by the name of Herschel Pratt. He's considered the godfather of groups, and he started groups back in 1905. He was a medical doctor, and he treated patients with tuberculosis. And so what he found out is when treating his patients with that, he noticed that there were a lot of anxiety and depression. And so he decided to form a group to kind of talk to them about that, where they're giving them the opportunity to process that. But then what was so brilliant about it is there was a mutual reciprocation going on in terms of peer support. Now, how many of you are here are peer support and lived experience? And so what I'm saying is all of this is very vital. Each one of us are very vital, regardless of our education or our position in life, to really make a difference in the community. But this is what we based our therapeutic model on. We talked about the approach and then the group model. The approach, of course, was when men get together, they have grits and eggs and bacon and things like that. And so we would eat on Saturday mornings, and then we would go specifically after that, we would go into the group. And so the approach is based on evidence-based practices. And so with those evidence-based practices, we use assessment tools to incorporate into the group discussion. Okay? Like, for example, we may use the ACE or Beck's inventory. Psychologists use the cross-cutting analysis. And so there are different assessments that we use to try to gather information so that we can continue building out the curriculum to make sure that we are making sure that we are able to develop the subjects that men would need as we move forward in the future. The group model, it's like 5 variables. First, when you come in the group on Saturdays, it starts about 11, the group, and it lasts for about 50 minutes to an hour. The first phase is psychoeducation. During this time, the therapist is given 15 minutes to talk about a specific subject. He could be talking about depression, and then he would educate the group of men about what depression looks like, the origin of it, what are some of the symptoms, and then he goes into the therapeutic space. Normally in the therapeutic space, the therapist would ask about 3 questions. And so that would get the group engaged and beginning to talk about what's going on with them. And it's so fascinating sometimes when you're sitting in these groups and how men are able to release what's going on with him or them based on the therapeutic questions. And this is when the group engage, and that's where well-being is promoted. And especially when that individual begin to feel safe, they begin to release whatever they're carrying through Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Are you following me? And then there's the third variable is the empowerment and the skill building. And that's where, when we're in this circle, the group of men begin to share their stories, and begin to talk about some of the challenges that they have. Sometimes the therapist, it all depends on the presentation, he will break them into groups. They will break off for about 5 or 10 minutes and come back and talk about some of the things that they've learned or they discuss, or if there's any type of skills that they can take with them after the group. And then what we call scalable solutions. And the reason why we offered scalable solutions, well, let me back up. The whole idea of this movement was to offer a space for men to come in and to receive therapy in a safe space for free. Did y'all hear what I said? Yes. For free. And we did this consistently for about 12 months, and then we started looking for funding. In addition to that, and the reason why we knew that the scalable solutions would be, I guess, important for the men, it is because it was based up on based up on the CDC, and we were attempting to close the gap. But then under the scalable solutions, what we decided to do, what we noticed, we got back in our group and we began to talk, okay, something is missing. Okay, we're able to give these individuals a group session, but then it just drops off. Then we came up with this brilliant idea, Dr. Adams, Bree, myself, and the team, we should offer therapy to individuals that cannot afford the therapy after the group. Are y'all hearing what I'm saying? Yes. And so what we decided is to offer individual therapy for individuals that come to the group at least 1 or 2 sessions to help them continue to heal in the process. I think that's just amazing. For free. And then, of course, a part of the group model is it involves tracking the outcomes, monitoring the data, intake, recording, people registering, and then just kind of making sure that we gather the information of the individuals that come to the group. Can I get the next slide? The therapeutic model, there are certain subjects that we've talked about. One is, I think that really stood out to me, is creating better systems to address services, providing gaps in mental health, common diagnosis among men, and then partner relationship and intimate partner violence. And again, some of the assessment tools, you'll see them right there that we've used, and some of the outcomes that we found. Some of the outcomes was increasing awareness, meaning reducing the stigma, peer support, improving coping skills, reducing symptoms, personal growth, and then accessibility to resources. Could you go to the next slide? And so Bree is going to come to talk to you about some of the outcomes that she has found with working with the men over the last 24 months. Thank you.
One of the interesting things about working with men is getting them to adhere to signing in, getting them to adhere to following up on emails. It's like you say you want the help, and then I'm tracking you down, running you down to give you the help. So one of the things when it comes to attendance that's been kind of challenging is that we'll have 50 people in the room and 5 people on paper. And I'll go and make an announcement and say, hey, everybody, we actually need for you to sign in, da, 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 da. And then it'll still be 7 people on the paper when I leave. So what we've done is go around and try to keep account. What I thought is that, okay, if we create a system and they can, sign in, then they'll do it. But I realized that I've had to stay the entire duration of the group, usually to make sure that I'm counting if somebody's coming in and out. So because this was from 23 and 2024, and I began to start attending sessions probably in about, March or April of 2024, then some of our data is skewed. So although we have probably 595 people counted, Those are from pictures that I could actually say I, physically counted, but our projected attendance is actually higher because I know that when I'm in the room, I could see 20 men coming in and out, and at the end we take the picture, so I know that I probably lost about 20 people in the picture, as well as 80 people who didn't sign the sheet. So that's where it's interesting, and we continue to try to navigate or pivot to try to make it easier, or to just try to say, hey, how can we do this in a way where people are being accounted for? So that's why the numbers are, hey, we have registration, attendees, and that's also another thing. We have men who will register and then don't show up, and then we have people who don't register and show up. So next slide, please. But some of the data that has been tremendous is that when the men do show up, they enjoy themselves. 4 out of 5, 4.82, that we have an overall rating of 4.82, which is pretty high. We have about 1 out of every 2 men come back. And when we do get them to answer the questions, some of the things that they explain that they have an interest in is, hey, we want to learn more about how can we improve our relationships. So can we have more classes on that? Some of them, one of the biggest things is that they actually like to form more group settings instead of individual settings. So even trying to come to a space where we're like, okay, so should we offer extended group therapy instead of individual therapy? So also topics of parenting and fatherhood seems to be important to them, as well as like, hey, should we do some recreational outings? Is that something that some of the men are interested in? And here's some of the data to explain that. Also, what makes this significant as well is helping us to understand, even from like a grant perspective, what are some of the issues that even the men aren't aware of that may be risk factors to violence or risk factors to depression or anxiety or trauma. And so we have them to ask questions and find that at least a quarter of the men are married. That may or may not have an indication on whether or not they may be dealing with challenges. So say if you're married, but you've been unemployed in the last 6 months, that may be circumstantial to why you may be going through something. So helping them to having that data helps us to understand, okay, how can we support them appropriately? Also being a parent, if I have a child who may be going through some issues, does that impact how I'm feeling? One of the biggest things that I've noticed with the data based on age demographics, which we'll see later, is the young people under the age of 18 who have showed up have a high prevalence of suspension and expulsion, which obviously shows me that they've usually have a predictor that they've experienced trauma. As well, there's 1 out of 4 men have had a loss via violence, whether that's a friend, a loved one, or somebody close. So that's also a thing that, hey, if you have a loved one, if 1 out of 4 men, Black men, have a loss due to violence, then we already know that the correlation for trauma is high. And most of them aren't even aware that they may have those issues. So next slide. And so here's the zip codes that are represented. I thought about creating a slide that shows like all the extra demographics, but most of the numbers that have the highest record, so 46254, 46218, 46208, if you look at those zip code demographics, it's a high percentage of African Americans in the community. There tends to be a high correlation or moderate correlation to violence in the community. Some of them have poor access to food, poor access to, poor access to care. What else? To healthcare, there was another one that stood out. Transportation as well. There was one that was, I'm trying to think of. Also renting versus owning. And because in the past several years, we've seen a high spike in housing, the fact that a lot of men have experienced unemployment and are at risk for eviction also creates some issues where, hey, I'm experiencing anxiousness or I'm experiencing depression, and I may not know what that looks like. So having a program like this where I can be in a men and I'm learning about these things help me to identify some issues that I may have and access the help that I need. So the zip codes really help us to see, okay, what may be going on around you. And like talked about the social determinants of health, we can then begin to assess, okay, what are some social environments or some social indicators that we may need to address people specifically, or we may need to increase resources in these particular zip codes. Next slide. And so we have the age demographics. If you see, most of our men are from the ages of about 45 to 55, although we do have the range of 18 to 35 is the ones who are more likely to be involved in violence. So the fact that we have a continuation and an increase of support of individuals who are seeking help in those age ranges is really important. But because we're in a faith community setting, I believe that from 36 to 65 is why we see it higher. And also think, 65 and above 65, 7.2. Put that in there. Okay. So here's the information about the men's previous experiences with therapy. So it's not that the men haven't had therapy. It has been that it's been kind of so-so whether or not they come back. So I think only 30% of them come back to therapy after they have their initial session, not with us, but previously. So we usually ask them, have you ever been in therapy? Most of them have said they have, but have you went to therapy after 1 or 2 sessions? No, they don't continue. So something that was very significant is that although we had about 38.9% preference for male, 5.6% preference for female, 55% preference of either, we had a 96 or close to 97% preference for somebody of the same ethnic background. And so that really, really indicated that we have to have representation when it comes to therapeutic support, and that really has a direct correlation on whether or not they will continue services. Also, you see that we had about 700 men, but we've had 20 men who actually went through with therapy. So we have people who sign up, we'll chase them down. They may not answer the phone, they may not respond back. So one of the things that we've continued to try to pivot is, okay, well, if you are interested in individual therapy, I think that as time progresses and we get the funding, that group therapy may be something that we offer, because that's something that men have stated that they are interested in. Also, 96% of men desire, all the men who have attended, 96% of them wanted to continue beyond their initial session. So those who have come to us and work with the therapist, most of them want to continue after their initial session.
And so our goal is, we're focusing on sustainability at this point. And so we're continuing to talk with the focus group, continually improving our system, and continue to looking for funding and resources and community engagement. I know we only have about 5 minutes, but we want to leave these 5 minutes open for any questions that anyone may have about the program. Jacqueline, could you give her a card? That was the first person that asked, raised their hand. Raise her hand again. Yes, ma'am.
So you have a one-on-one with therapists, and with the certifications for peer services increasing, what is your availability, or what is your plans to maybe have like one-on-one peer services, like recovery coaching, life skills, recovery skills? Are those something that you thought about putting into your program? You're doing therapy one-on-one, but what about peer services one-on-one instead of just a group setting?
I think that's the whole ideal of continuous improvement, the whole ideal of continual improvement and community engagement. We're very open. Jacqueline, could you get this young lady's information before she leaves? And you can, we'd like to invite you to our focus group to have those conversations. Okay? Any other questions? Could you pass them? We got about 3 people. Could you pass them?
You mentioned early on about having a women's group as well. Where are you as a framework of getting that rolled out?
That's
Right.
a good question.
Glad you brought that up.
Yeah. I'll let Dr. Adams answer that question.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. One of the things we realized is we were getting a demand for this, like as the men's group started growing, then the women, including my wife, were like, hey, what about us? We were like, hey, sounds good, but y'all don't want us doing it. We need some women to lead it. So we brought some women together, much like we did the team of men. And we're happy to announce that as of, this is October, September, we did our very first, I say we to be inclusive, we did our very first women and mental health movement session September. So now we have a women in mental health that is led by women. Dr. Holland and I stay away. Okay? So it's not the women are in front, but the men are running it. No, we're not. It's the women owning it. My wife, one of the other local pastors' wives, they are kind of like the Dr. Holland and myself. Dr. Holland has pulled together a team of women therapists, just like the men, and they're off and running. So it is up and running. It is monthly, and so far so good. So thank you for asking. Yes, there, I guess.
Do you all have partnerships with local mental health agencies if the men and or women have a need for psychotropics?
That's a Dr. Holland question.
You talking about drugs?
see how this works? The therapy stuff goes to him, the other stuff goes to me.
Yeah, we're connected to Fairbanks that offers services, and it's another. Fairbanks come to mind just right off the top of my head. But to answer your question, yes, there's a couple more I just can't think of right now. Did I answer your question?
Yes. So I work for Meridian Health Services. And
Meridian?
Yes. And we have it all inclusive, and we have IOP, and we offer services to children and adolescents and school-based. And we also have dual diagnosis programs for those men who you spoke about trauma. Maybe that somebody said to me, I would like to hire you, but I see that you have a gap in your literacy. So maybe that they had an undiagnosed learning disability. So we also have programs to support those individuals who have dual diagnoses.
So we're going to have Jacqueline to reach out to you too. She's going to get your information and invite you to the focus group if you're interested. We have time for maybe one more. One more. Young lady?
Okay. I know it's a church-based practice and you have color, but there are some color of men which I personally know, and they don't believe in God at all. So like, how do you deal with those kind of folks that they come to mind?
That don't have a base of faith?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I've had a couple people that have come to me that were atheists. But the commonality, pain is pain, regardless. And depression is depression, regardless. And so we shift the lenses. We look more of the medicine model, the therapeutic model, and that's the avenue that we stay on, out of respect or whatever the case may be. And so if an individual come and they're an atheist and they've experienced trauma or grief unexpectedly, we begin to have that conversation. We do an assessment on the presenting problems. We begin to look for the symptoms of that, and then we come up with some type of treatment plan to assist that person in that process. Okay, Dr. Adams, is that making sense to you? Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. And just to build on what Doc said, so this month's focus for the men in mental health is trauma and re-entry, right? So we wanted to specifically address over the next couple of months the traumas that men deal with coming out of the system or being in the system. We purposely decided not to have those at a church because we did not want the church to be a barrier. Because there are men who would say, I'm not going to the church, but they need the service. So the next two are going to be in community centers. So that's another way. Thank you for that question. Wonderful. That's another way that as we grow this, we're addressing those kinds of things.
I am so sorry. Our time is up. I want to be respectful.